Welcome back to the Shakespeare Shack podcast with hosts Anna,
Allison,
and Brooklyn.
If you tuned in last week, we talked about Romeo and Juliet and its overarching influence on modern pop culture.
Honestly, I still think that Romeo and Juliet is better than the original play.
just drop it, Brooklyn.
This podcast, we will be discussing Macbeth, another play of Shakespeare's, and specifically will focus on the women's characters' contributions to the story. Later, we will be covering the male characters, but for now, let's delve into Lady Macbeth.
In order to really understand Lady Macbeth's character, we must understand what a girl boss is.
Not again.
No. Listen, Lady Macbeth throughout the entire play has shown the characteristics of a true girl boss, which, by the way, for our viewers that don't know, a girl boss is a woman who takes control of her own life and knows her worth, and that is exactly what Lady Macbeth does. Like, in Act 1, Scene 5, when she notices her husband is being a bit of a chicken, she says, "Only look up clear, to alter favor ever is to fear, leave all the rest to me." Which is like her realizing that Macbeth is an idiot and he does not have the gall to go through with a plan like this. A plan that, by the way, she came up with, even though he'd be the one to directly benefit. And then later on, after he kills Duncan and is basically losing his mind, she tells him, quote, "Infirm of purpose, give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil." Which is her way of saying, boy, stop being a coward. Dead people cannot hurt you. To me, this showcases yet again how she goes against gender roles by being the one who takes control of the situation. Oh, and then another thing. I think specifically because she is a woman, gaining power through her husband is the only way to get power at all. Like, I know it seems that the only reason she's doing all of this is because she wants more for her husband, but really, this is the only way for her to get more. You know what I mean? Like, basically getting to the top by manipulating men? Yeah, I know that's right. Certified girl boss.
I mean, in some ways, I disagree. Although she does serve as a great villain in the story, she does not break any new gender rules through her character. Everything she did was for her husband and for her husband's success. Everything she had done was for the sake of her husband to meet the witch's prophecy. Even after doing so much for him, she was viewed as manly for her actions, not as a strong woman, but someone who acts like a man. There was no respect for her as a woman because of the things she did, but rather because she was perceived as manly. In Act 1, Scene 5, she says, "Glam as thou art in Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised. Yet I do fear thy nature. Hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise with the valour of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round, which fate and metaphysical aid doth seem to have thee crowned withal." This quote shows that Lady Macbeth's devotion to the promises of her husband. She says he is destined to become king, and she will do everything in her power to make sure he can claim the crown.
You know, honestly, I can see where both of you guys are coming from, but I think that this just adds to the complexity of her character. Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, without Lady Macbeth, the story would be A, uneventful, and B, we wouldn't even know if the throne would have been Macbeth's without her. Her husband does use her as a pawn at times, but we can also see that vice versa, she uses him as a pawn for what she believes is their true destiny.
No, yeah, I agree. Macbeth would not have claimed the throne without her. She was an incredibly important piece to encourage him to commit the murder, which plays into a value of hers that I believe to be courage. Lady Macbeth demonstrated how courage was important to her by constantly expecting her husband to act brave. Because she felt as though his nature wasn't strong enough to handle heavy situations, she encouraged him to have courage and accomplished what needed to be done, which can be seen in Act 1, Scene 7, where she says, "We fail, but screw your courage to the sticking place and will not fail." She knows that being brave is the only way they will be successful, and there is no time for him to back down.
Honestly, I wholeheartedly agree, but I also feel like she really did value her fate. She would always make these comments and had this manner about her that she really did trust the universe, even if she did have a little influence from time to time. When she was discussing with Macbeth about his spot on the throne, we can see how she was almost manifesting this to happen and trusting the universe while simultaneously using her courage to make this a reality. We can see this in Act 1, Scene 5, quote, "I have learned by the perfid's resort that there is more to them than mortal knowledge. When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves heir, into which they wanted, glams thou art, Cawdor, and shall be what thou art promised." In this scene, the witches have promised Lady Macbeth that Macbeth will be king. She believes these prophecies are because of the magic she witnessed and claims that Macbeth will be king, which later on in the story does go to happen.
Personally, I don't believe Lady Macbeth has any principles just because of the fact that all her values have a negative spin to them. Like, valuing fate and courage aren't necessarily bad things, but it is how she acts upon these values that make them bad, therefore leading her to having no principles.
Yeah, I agree.
Then we'll be back after this short break to discuss the witches. And we are back to discuss whether or not the witches were significant characters to the story.
In my opinion, I believe that the witches were the most important characters in the story. The witches caused the story and carried it along. There would be nothing to Macbeth if the witches were not present. From the very beginning to the end, their presence is undoubtedly there, even if they are only physically there for a few of the scenes. Quote from Scene 4, Act 1, from The Second Witch. Quote, "By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked comes this way." This later goes on to be explained in the story and can even be classified as foreshadowing, as they state what is about to happen and possibly Macbeth's fate.
I disagree. I don't think they're the most important characters. I think it was more the free will of the characters themselves that drove the plot. The witches merely put the ideas out there, and the characters themselves were the ones who decided whether to act upon these ideas or not. And we can use Scene 3, Act 1 as an example. When the witches first meet Macbeth, they say to him, quote, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter." This is where they plant the idea of him being king, and they never forced him to act upon it. It was through his own free will that he decided to go after this new goal of his.
I can see both sides of your guys' argument. The witches were significant to getting this story going, but it is hard to tell if that can apply after the first few acts, as the characters' free will seems to drive their motives and actions, like Macbeth killing Banquo. But besides that, we're nearing the end of this segment, so do you guys have any last thoughts or on any values or principles of the witches?
I'm not sure if the witches have any principles per se, but I think that they definitely have values, one of these being the act of being evil or wicked. We can see this in Act 1, Scene 3. Quote, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter." Basically, in this scene, what they're doing is they're messing with his future and basically convincing him that he will be king and that all will be fine and dandy. Later, this can be proved to be untrue, although he does become king. This can also make a factor of chaos, considering one of their other values that may be set to come.
I could totally see how that would play into the value of chaos. In Act 3, Scene 5, Hecate says to the witches, quote, "How did you dare to trade in traffic with Macbeth in riddles and affairs of death? And I, the mistress of your charms, the close contriver of all harms, was never called to bear my part or show the glory of our art." They chose to leave their boss Hecate out of their antics, showing how they spoke to Macbeth for pure chaos and nothing else. They did not predict his future, but rather tricked him into acting a certain way so that it would come true, as seen through Lady Macbeth's actions and his own, which are pursued later in the story.
Do you guys think the witches hold any principles?
I don't think so.
No, like I previously said, their characters are pretty negative in their contributions to the entirety of the story.
So then, just to recap, on this episode of Shakespeare Shack, we discussed whether or not Lady Macbeth is a girl boss and elaborated on how she values fate and courage. Additionally, we delved into the three wicked sisters and all mutually agree that they value being evil and inciting chaos, which I cannot say the same about our agreement on their importance in the story. We're going to take a quick ad break and we'll be back in a minute to discuss more about the male characters.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, or if you enjoyed Shakespeare in general, you should check out Susan Loves Shakespeare comics. Her comics are just amazing, and her most recent work actually shows the character arc of Macbeth himself. For more information, visit SusanLovesShakespeare.com. That's spelled SUSAN lovesshakespeare.com. You can also use our code SHACK for 20% off any purchase. Again, that's code SHACK for 20% off. And with that, that's our show.